Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the PHIner Life Show. This is our 9/11 Patriot Day special. Oh, and I had to bring out the big guns. Everybody give a warm welcome to, he's retired now, but he's still a big gun. All right, give it up for General Larry Spencer. That's what I'm talking about. Now,
Thank you.
listen, General Spencer, you were the 37th Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. Top of the top, cream of the crop, working on Joint Chiefs of Staff, everything. Pentagon. Can't get no bigger, right?
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, I was very fortunate in my career, and as you know, I spent the first 7.5 years or so enlisted, so I feel like I have a really good perspective. But to go from essentially E1 to O10 was quite a ride. So I was very fortunate.
Yes, yes. So let's get right into it. So this is our Patriots Day show. Also our September 11th show. Never forgetting the events that occurred on 9/11. And you served, I mean, during the 70s, 80s, not you saw the whole just shift in military culture. But before we get into that, just give us a little bit of background, like what life event happened that said, Larry, you have to join the Air Force?
Well, that's an interesting question because you're right. I was in high school in the 70s, and there was a lot going on. Civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam protests, hippies, that whole all of that turmoil. Martin Luther King got killed, Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy got killed. I mean, just a lot of. It almost felt like the country was sort of coming apart. And unfortunately, the military was not, seen in a very good light with a lot of folks in our society. Not because of anything the military did, was because of the whole Vietnam issue. And we had folks return from Vietnam and didn't get a good reception when they came back. There was a period of time, as an example, if you worked in the D.C. area in the Pentagon, you didn't wear a uniform because it got that bad. And so, although my father had served 20 years in the Army and retired, so I was accustomed to military life. I had no plan at all to join the military. My focus was on football, and that was pretty much it. And so, got through high school. Had a lot of scholarship offers. The complicator was, my mother had not completed high school. My father had completed high school, but he was in the Army. So make a long story short, I was the oldest of 6 children, and they had no experience with college or scholarships or any of that. And so one day, after graduation, I was over in a mall shopping, and you have to use your imagination now because if you can imagine, I had an afro like you wouldn't believe. Now, I wish I could grow one now, but those days are long gone. But I was over in the mall, and I bought this is a mall in Maryland, and I bought a purple jumpsuit and some high platform shoes to match. And so I was walking through the mall, and there was an Air Force recruiter's office there, and I wasn't thinking about joining the Air Force. I was just looking at the airplane pictures, and then the guy walked out. He was a staff sergeant, recruiter, and invited me in, and we got to talking. And now what he did is not illegal, but he was a pretty fast talker. And he essentially told me, he said, look, I know you want to play football, but so here's what we'll do. You enlist now, you get through basic training, you then apply for the Air Force Academy, and you go and play football. I said, hey, sounds good to me. Of course, that was technically possible, but certainly not practical. And so I joined on the spot. My parents didn't know anything about it. My friends didn't know anything about it. And so I had to go home and tell my parents I joined the Air Force. And that it was that sort of inexplicable. It was unplanned. I had no plans at all, but it happened. I'm glad you can call it fate. I'm glad it happened. And I ended up really enjoying it.
Now, I'm just trying to envision the pit session with your purple jumpsuit.
Right.
He's like, listen, that's a great color. Would you like to play on the Air Force football team? We play against Army and Navy. So
Right.
you join the Air Force, and fast forward, you go from enlisted to officer. And let's jump fast forward now. You joined in the 70s. Talk about the era of service pre 9/11, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I feel fortunate to have been able to span all of those decades because, yeah, the 70s was pretty tough. Again, tail end of Vietnam, coming out of Vietnam, a lot of folks getting out of the military, still sort of a lot of civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam stuff going on. So military life was difficult because there was just such a still sort of an anti-military vibe going on. But then as we got away from Vietnam, things picked up. And again, looking back on it, I don't think Americans ever did not respect the military. It was just the Vietnam War caused such turmoil, politically and socially, that it was the military just kind of got dragged into it. But so I got through my enlisted years, and I started taking college courses, completed my degree, and went to officers training school. And so literally in 1980 is when I got commissioned as second lieutenant. And I loved it. Again, I was planning to actually get out of the Air Force after 4 years. But once I got my degree, applied for officers training school and got commissioned, I said, well, I'll give it a shot and see what happens.
Mm, 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 mm. So, what was the vibe of serving in the Air Force throughout the 80s? I'm not gonna give away my youth, but I was born in the 80s. How was it? What
It
what
was
did y'all
great.
do? What was
Yeah,
some duty stations?
yeah, it was great. So I had 24 moves over my career. So my initial assignment was down at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia at a Air Force Logistics Center, where it's a huge depot where they do maintenance and repair, major maintenance and repair on airplanes, on big airplanes. And so it was great. I loved it. My family enjoyed it. We enjoyed the moving around. I didn't stay there very long, 2 years. I was off to the Pentagon, which was sort of unusual for a lieutenant to be assigned to the Pentagon. But that was a tough assignment for me because I was, the junior person in the building, I think, and I was surrounded by all these colonels, and it was interesting. But the interesting thing, one of the interesting things was, they didn't care that I was first lieutenant. They gave me as much work as they gave everybody else. So it was really busy. It was hard on my family because as a first lieutenant living in DC area, the closest I could afford to live was down in Woodbridge, Dale City, which is about 25 miles or so south of the Pentagon, right off of 95. And, with any traffic at all, DC area traffic, I mean, it was an hour and a half, 2 hour commute every day. So it was tough on the family being so young. I had young kids in elementary school. And so, there were days where that I spent the night in the Pentagon, if you can imagine, back then in those days, because the Pentagon was very stressful. The computers weren't there. Everything was done by hand. We all had typewriters on our desk, if you can believe that. I worked in budget in the Pentagon, and we had an entire office that all they did was make charts. So today, you and I can whip up a chart on a computer in 30 seconds. Back then, you had to develop the chart, then put it on a machine with little pins on it with acetate, and they would just jerk around and make all the charts. And you take that one off and you make another one. And of course, if you made a mistake or someone didn't like the chart, you'd have to go draw it all over again. But there was a office full of people in the Pentagon that did nothing but make charts. So just keep in mind the automation and all of the tools that we take for granted now. There was no internet. There was no Google. There was none of that. No iPhone. And so it was. It seems pretty primitive now, but you do what you have to do. And when I went back on my second tour in the Pentagon, it was a lot nicer because so many of the manual tasks that we had to do had all been automated.
So, okay, so now you go into the 90s. What was the 90s vibe like? And what was, I guess, the song for that decade that would encapsulate your Air Force career?
Oh my goodness. Um, well, that's a hard one because I'm a big music guy. And if you can think back over the '70s, where a lot of good music came out because it was all socially conscious. Then you kind of move through the disco, R&B, and rock and roll was all kind of always there, and then sort of moved into more rap, in the more years. But yeah, I remember in the '90s. Now I'm becoming more senior, starting to get opportunities to command, and the military is. At this point, I just love what I'm doing. I'm getting a chance to lead, which is what I've always wanted to do, and getting a chance to really help troops. And because I had enlisted time, I was particularly fond of and paid most attention to the enlisted force because let's be honest, it's the enlisted force that gets most of the work done, that fights our wars for us. That the Air Force is a very highly technical service, but none of that works without our enlisted force fixing airplanes, fixing satellites, fixing drones. I mean, and all of the things that they do. So yeah, in the '90s was really great and sort of propelled me into the 2000s. But yeah, the military was a good place to be in the '90s because no major wars at the time, and it was really about just training and preparing in case something happened. But it was a great time to serve.
All right. So, I mean, you still didn't give me the song for the 90s, but I
Yeah, I
was
think
waiting. I was like, is he going to throw it in there? Is it the Spice Girls? Is it the Macarena?
no,
But
I would say this: people. When I was growing up, my father was a really hard worker. He had two jobs, always working, and I would spend the summers in my grandfather's farm. He had a tobacco farm. Again, up at 5:30, working all the time. And so people quite often, almost jokingly, talk about my work ethic. Uh, and so I would say, I don't think it was the '70s, but to summarize, I think my work performance, I would pick "I Go to Work" by Kool Moe Dee. Listen to
wow.
that when we're done.
Wow.
It's
Okay. Okay. Listen, hey, you ain't said nothing but a G thing to me, LL Cool J. Now, we get to September 11th, 2001. Where were you that day? And what was your reaction to the events
yeah,
that were
yeah. I
unfolding?
mean, it's one of those days. I'll never forget. So I was a colonel. I was the comptroller or CFO for Air Combat Command at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Um, as the airplanes hit the trade towers, obviously we were all shocked and glued to the TV. But I still was not convinced that this was an act of war. I thought, my God, I don't know what happened, but how could something like that happen? And then once I heard the airplane hit the Pentagon, there was no doubt that we were under attack. And so at Langley, now again, things are much different now. We let the wing at Langley, the first fighter wing, had the F-15s at the time, and of course they were up training, but they didn't carry live munitions. I mean, and generally, unless you're going to a range to practice firing, a fighter, you don't fly around, the country with live munitions. And so no one knew what was going to happen. But I remember the wing commander at Langley recalled all the airplanes, got them all ready to go, just in case, they got called. They never did, but they were sort of getting ready. But immediately our commander called an emergency meeting. And from that point forward, I mean, it was, from there we launched right into Iraqi freedom, and it just never stopped. I mean, it was very intense for a long time.
Now, you were a colonel,
Mm-hmm.
and the events of September 11th happened, when did you, I guess, because after that, you become a 1 star, you become a 2 star, 3 star, four. During those years, and as you climbed and progressed up the rank, when did it really like become it's an everyday war on terror? When did it become like solidified in your mind that this might happen for a while? We might be in Afghanistan and conducting operations for a while.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone could have predicted, 20 years in Afghanistan. But it was clear. And if you remember, back then, President Bush sort of warned everybody that this was not, this was not a short time war, that what was referred to back then as the war on terror would go on for some time. And as you know, and as we found out, I mean, it metastasized and moved all around the world. And so it was pretty clear as we, got into, initially Afghanistan, and then, and by the way, so it just never stopped. Even after Iraqi freedom, which involved the, kicking the Iraqis out of Kuwait, the Air Force still stayed because they had to protect the airspace there. And so the Air Force really never came back. And then, we got the second President Bush, and then we just launched right into, Iraqi freedom. And it just, and as you know, until a few days ago, we were still at it. In fact, one of the things that frustrates me a little bit is I think, even when I talk to my own relatives, until recently, when, as we all watched the events unfold with us leaving Afghanistan and everything that surrounded the departure, most Americans didn't think we were at war, and didn't really, it didn't touch them. Everyone gets up every morning, they go to work, they go to the beach, they go to vacation, they go on with their lives, not really understanding that there are military members around the world that are in harm's way and are dying. But so, this sort of war on terror, so-called, is interesting in a lot of ways, not just because it lasts so long, but because Americans look at it as something somewhere else. And they don't really identify it as a quote unquote war, because it's really not a declared war against a specific country. It's what we're trying to avoid is another attack on the United States. And that means fighting in pockets all around the globe. And it's not clear to me, frankly, that our leaders in either party have really gotten up in front of the American people and explained that to them. It's just not, because as I talk to folks, and you talk about, Afghanistan or other places around the globe, they're just disconnected from it, which is a shame.
Now, you were selected as the 37th Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. Let's talk about that for a little bit. When did you learn that you were selected? And if you could give us one of your crowning achieving moments during your tenure within that office.
Yeah, I was a 3-star in the Joint Staff, and people often ask me, did you sort of plan your career? Did you, have a strategy to sort of move up the ladder? And the answer is no. I mean, once I made colonel, I never thought that would happen. And so everything after that was sort of gravy. And I was prepared to retire after every one of those opportunities. And so on the Joint Staff as a 3-star, I was prepared to retire, and which, by the way, would have been great. You can't complain about retiring as a 3-star. But about 2 years into that tour, the Chief of Staff at the time of the Air Force called me and said, "Hey, we're thinking about making you Vice Chief." And I was shocked, and because I certainly wasn't anything I expected. And he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, everything the Air Force has asked me to do in the past, I've always tried to do my best." And I said, "Look, if I get selected for this job, I'll give you everything I got." And so I got selected. In terms of crowning achievements, I'm hesitant to talk about anything I did because it's always a team effort. But let me describe a couple of things. First, what is most memorable to me in that job, and this is connected to the question you asked earlier about the war on terror. Early on in the job, we lost an airman in Afghanistan, and I had to go up to Dover to do the dignified transfer. I say had to, I mean, I was honored to. And a dignified transfer is when we have a fallen member that gets killed in action overseas, and they're flown back. They're flown back into Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. And when the plane lands, there's a ceremony. Once the back of the plane drops down, the honor guard goes up. They get the casket, and they literally bring it down off the airplane and transfer it to a van that takes it away for processing of the body. And so, which is why it's called a dignified transfer. And I got to tell you, that was one of the most difficult and solemn things I've ever been involved with. Goes back to my earlier point that I wish most Americans could see that, because they don't. Generally, they don't. Generally, it's for families only. But that's something that sticks in my mind is of something I was honored to do, but it's just something that will always stick with me, because that's when it's real. We all can do a lot of talking about what we would do and how war should be fought and whether we should get out of Afghanistan or not. And, everybody can prognosticate about that. But when you're standing on the flight line and you got family members crying, over on the side, and, that casket comes off that airplane, it gets pretty real. So that was sort of, it wasn't a crowning achievement, but it was certainly something that marks that tour for me. But I think something that I was really proud of, and it kind of goes back to actually goes all the way back to my childhood. And that is, I wasn't a very good student in school. But the one thing I remember was my teacher, when I was in elementary school, she read us the story, The Ant and the Grasshopper. And it was essentially about, it was one of Aesop's fables. And it was essentially about a grasshopper who was lazy, who didn't want to gather any food during the winter. He criticized the ants for doing that. Winter came, the grasshopper was out in the snow with no food, and the ants were in good shape, because they had prepared. I don't know why that stuck with me, but I've been a zealot for saving money and being efficient ever since. Now, my wife would tell you I'm just cheap, and that's probably true too. But I carried that with me throughout my career, including when I was vice chief of staff. And the timing was such that you may recall the term sequestration. It was a law that our folks, the politicians, came up with, the president and folks on the Hill, that essentially said if the two sides can't agree on a plan or a package to reduce the budget, these arbitrary, capricious cuts are going to go into effect on a certain date. And no one expected that to happen. Everyone understood that, no sane people would allow that to happen. And of course, as divided as we are as a nation, it happened. And so I was sort of given the stick to help get the Air Force through that very difficult period of cuts. And so we implemented a program called Every Dollar Counts, where we literally went out to the field and said, send us all your ideas on how to reduce money, how to be more efficient. And I got to tell you, it was, I was heartened to see the just sheer outpouring of ideas from folks in the field who always thought, there were things we can do better, but didn't feel like they had an avenue to express those. So to give an example, I remember we opened the spigot for 30 days of ideas on 1 May, and I was worried that we wouldn't get any. On 1 May, we got 1,200 suggestions. By around mid-May or so, we had 17,000. And so we had to set up almost a war room like um, activity to just go through them all. And it was just amazing to me to connect with folks right in the field, to give them, to implement their ideas and to recognize them for that. I'll give you a quick example. There was a group over at Andrews, which was close to the Pentagon, that their commander called me because they went right to their commander and they said, we've been making these suggestions for years and the folks in the Pentagon keep turning it down. So they didn't want to go through the system. They wanted to come right to me. And to make a long story short, at Andrews, when, high rollers come into the base, they used to pick them up with these really expensive leased cars. And they came to me and said, look, we have a cheaper model car that will do the same thing. But because these folks are DVs, we're paying an expensive lease cost. And we think that's a waste of money. Now, again, these weren't bad people. Andrews is obviously in the nation's capital. There's a lot of DVs that go through there. So this wasn't some intentional, I'm going to go waste some money. It was just, they were all trying to put their best foot forward. But, we were in a period of time where we couldn't afford that. And so I approved it on the spot. And so I went over to Andrews to give it was 3 of them, to give them a coin and congratulate them. And when I was there, I said, hey, I'm just curious, how much are we saving on the lease? Because we're now leasing the cheaper model. And they said, no, you don't understand. We own the other cars. So you're telling me we own cars that we aren't using and we're leasing cars just because we want to look good in the shower, so to speak? And they said, yes. So that sort of thing, both big and small, happened all across the Air Force, whether it was things like that or re-engineering airplanes to make them more efficient. It was just, for me, I was just as happy as I could be because it was just amazing the amount of money we were able to save. So again, I wouldn't call that my crowning achievement, but it was certainly something I was very proud of as we all worked together.
Wow. That's one way how to mobilize everybody and anybody. This question is tapering on my mind while
Sure.
you're talking about it being a whole team effort. And speaking from experience as a leader, 4-star general, come on now. Organizational leadership. What was your philosophy behind how you conducted yourself as a leader and how you wanted to lead an organization? And what were some of the tips of the trade that you learned along the way, going from, a lieutenant all the way up to a 4-star general?
Right. Yeah, great question. And obviously there's, libraries full of leadership books, but what I found, and by the way, I think everyone has to lead within their own personality and their own, use their own strengths, understand their weaknesses and work on those. The reason I say that is because one of the things that's really important to me is mentorship. And I try to mentor a lot of folks now, but a lot of the mentors I have, I didn't try to copy what they did. I just tried to learn from what they did. I didn't want to be them. I wanted to be me. Because if you're not genuine, and that's the first thing I wanted to tell you, you have to lead genuinely. You can't, if you're a guy that doesn't generally go in and say, how was your weekend? How are your kids doing? If you try to fake that, people will see right through it. And by the way, people will accept you for who you are, but you have to be genuine. So 1, be genuine. 2 is, as a leader, I really cared about the folks I led. I would never do anything. I would never ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do. And so I think that came through that, this guy is serious. When he asks us to do something, he's not sitting in his office, sort of watching me. He's out there with us. Which brings me to number 3, and leadership by walking around was huge for me. And that's important today with everybody using email and Facebook and Instagram. We're driving people in their offices or on their iPhones. And I get it. I'm all for technology. But nothing, in my opinion, takes the place of looking your folks in their eye and having them hear directly from you, reading body language, just no kidding. How's it going? What can I do? What can I do to help? So leadership by walking around was huge for me. But I think, overall, I think a leader coming into an organization, first of all, you have to establish a vision. Folks have to know, where are we going? What's our goal here? What do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And that has to be articulated. So communication is also a big deal. Getting up in front of your folks and communicate. Anyone can get up and read a speech, but I'm not talking about reading a speech. I'm talking about genuinely talking to them, having them understand where it is that you're trying to take the organization. So for me, I love doing that. I love connecting with people. I'll give you a quick example of something I found very useful. I found that if you go in and tell your unit they're good, and you prove it to them, they'll be good. When I was a squadron commander at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and this was just prior to Operation Desert Storm, that unit hadn't won any awards at all. And they were kind of middle of the road. They were a good unit, but they hadn't been recognized for anything. And I just decided I was going to change that. And I went in and I said, look, by next year, we're going to be the Air Force Squadron of the Year. And so at that time, we had a command award and then an Air Force award. And I said, no, we're going to win the command award and the Air Force award. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but I said, okay. So we started saying, I started talking to them about, what does it take to be the best? And by the way, I didn't really care about the award. I cared about the award for them, but I really wanted to get the best out of them. It wasn't about the award. It was about them feeling good about themselves. And we a year later, we won the Air Force Comptroller Squadron of the Year. And by the way, after that, and I was almost joking, after that, they were all ecstatic and happy, and they felt good about themselves. They said, oh, well, how are we going to top that? I said, well, we're going to win it again. And we won it again, 2 years in a row. It's never happened before that. It's never happened after. Again, that wasn't about me. Because I'll give you an example. Once you get people fired up, and once you get people thinking that, we are good and we can be the best. I had lieutenants come to me and say, sir, you keep telling us, even though we're financial managers, our job is to launch airplanes. Our job is to make sure this base is ready to go to war. And so what we would like to do, and these are coming from lieutenants and NCOs, we would like to open on Saturday. So those on the flight line or those working, long hours during the week can come over and take care of their financial issues. I said, okay, if that's what you want, okay. They came to me and said, we would like to go down, we know we have to be here during the day, but we want to pull a midnight shift down with some of the workers who work at night and take all our stuff with us so we can have them come by and take care of their financial issues if they need to change something with their finances or where mud allotments and all that. And they did it. But I didn't come up with this. They viewed themselves as, we're the best financial managers in the Air Force. And that just built on itself. So leadership to me is for one, it's just so much fun. But because again, I really like people and I like getting the mission done. But when you can combine those two, have almost the same drive for getting the mission done as you do for taking care of people, that's golden.
All right. Well, General Spencer, thank you so much for this great interview. Now, before we go, I call this shameless plug time. Shameless plug time. Now, listen, where can people find you? Where can they link up with you? I know that you are working on something right now that we're going to talk about in November. You got to come on back, bring it back. We got a remix. But where can people find you right now? How can they follow you? How can they, get in contact with you?
Well, so I'm actually establishing as we speak a website, General Larry O. Spencer, so they can reach me there soon. But as you mentioned, I just completed a book. It's called Dark Horse. That's already out for pre-order, but it'll be released in November. So I'm excited about that. But it essentially traces my inner city upbringing in DC, all of that, like you said, going through the 70s, the hippies generation, coming in the Air Force, getting my commission, and then essentially going from inner city to the Pentagon. So that'll be released soon. So I am excited about that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, of course. We got to do the plug. Well, thank you so much, General Spencer, for giving me this great interview. General Larry
Thank you
Spencer,
so much.
everybody. Now I got to do my shameless plug. Listen, #1 military fraternity in America. All right. That's right. Mu Beta Phi. Listen, www.mbphikings2017.org. That is www.mbphikings2017.org. It's right there. Log on. Check us out. All right, everybody. Thank you for checking out this special edition of the PHIner Life Show with General Larry Spencer. We're going to have him on the show again. And thank you for all of your service, sir, to this nation. And I'd like to thank everybody that is currently serving right now. Listen, we are not forgetful. Thank you for your service. And to all of the families of 9/11, our prayers, our thoughts are with you. And to those who are service members from the 9/11, from the post 9/11 era, your sacrifice was well worth it. Thank you, everybody.